storm breaks in Brooklyn. Now, Ray Franz calls this section of his memoirs Inquisition. And he starts with the text in Luke chapter 11 from the Jerusalem Bible, which reads this way. When he left the house, the scribes and the Pharisees began a furious attack on him and tried to force answers from him on innumerable questions, setting traps to catch him in something he might say. An inquisition in the religious sense is an inquiry into individuals' personal convictions and beliefs. Historically, its aim has been not to aid the individual or to provide basis for reasoning with him, but to incriminate, to convict as heretical. The initiating cause for the inquiry often has nothing to do with the individual's being disruptive, malicious, or even being particularly vocal about his beliefs. Mere suspicion is sufficient cause to set in motion the inquisitory action. The suspect is viewed as, in effect, having no rights. Even his personal conversations with intimate friends are treated as something the inquisitors have full right to delve into. It was not solely the atrocious acts of punishment meted out in the Spanish Inquisition that earned it such a despised name in history. It was also the authoritarian approach and arrogant methods of interrogation employed to gain the incrimination so often zealously pursued by the religious judicial court. The torture and the violent punishment meted out then are outlawed today. But the authoritarian approach and arrogant methods of interrogation can still be practiced with apparent impunity. I am reminded here of an article in the January 22nd, 1981 issue of the Awake magazine titled Searching Out Legal Routes. It emphasized the superb legal precedents found in the Mosaic Law and, among other things, said, quote, since the local court was situated at the city gates, there was no question about the trial being public. And here the Watchtower, or Awake, quotes the passage in Deuteronomy 16:18-20. And quote goes on, no doubt the public trials helped influence the judges toward carefulness and justice, qualities that sometimes vanish in secret star chamber hearings. This principle was praised in the Society's publications. In actual practice, it was totally rejected. As Jesus said, they say one thing and do another. The secret star chamber hearings were preferred, as the evidence clearly shows. Only fear of the power of truth prompts that kind of proceedings. Those methods serve not the interests of justice or mercy, but the cause of those who seek incrimination. When we had our last conversation with the elders in downtown Toronto University congregation, there were two elders on the speakerphone, and Vivian and myself. And the cause of the phone call, the immediate cause of it, was that the elders were inviting us to a meeting where they wanted to ask us certain questions. And when we asked whether this would be a judicial meeting, they said it might turn into a judicial meeting. And when we inquired into the possibility that we might follow the 1981 precedent that the Watchtower was obviously praising, that public trials were somehow a better guarantee that justice would be served than a star chamber type hearing, when we suggested that might be one kind of meeting we would feel comfortable with, we got an interesting response, what I'll get to in a few minutes in the next segment. Ray Franz goes on, 4 weeks after starting my leave of absence while in Alabama, a phone call came from Ed Dunlap. After some general conversation, he told me that two members of the governing body, Lloyd Barry and Jack Barr, had come into his office and had interrogated him about his personal beliefs for about 3 hours. At one point, Ed asked, "What's the purpose of this third degree?" They assured him that it was not a third degree, but that they simply wanted to hear how he felt about some matters. They gave him no explanation as to what motivated their interrogation. Despite their claim that the discussion was simply informative, Ed's distinct impression was that it was the start of an organizational action that would prove both inquisitorial and punitive. Their questions inquired into his view of the organization, the teachings about 1914, the two classes of Christians, and the heavenly hope, and similar points. As regards the organization, he told his interrogators that his major concern was the obvious lack of Bible study on the part of the members of the governing body, that he felt that they had an obligation to the brothers to make such study and research of the Scriptures a primary concern, instead of allowing themselves to become so preoccupied with paperwork and other affairs that Bible study got crowded out. As to 1914, he frankly acknowledged that he felt it was something that one should not be dogmatic about, and he asked them if the governing body itself believed this was something completely solid, certain. The reply from the two men was that while there were one or two who had doubts, the body as a whole supported the date fully. He told them that if others in the writing department expressed themselves, it would be evident that almost all had different views on certain points. On another day, Albert Schroeder and Jack Barr began a person-by-person interrogation of each member of the writing department. None of these acknowledged the uncertainty they felt about specific teachings, though in personal conversation virtually every one had some point that he had expressed a different view on. The ironical feature of this was the diversity of viewpoint existing within the governing body itself, something that the interrogators never mentioned or acknowledged to those they questioned. I knew that Lyman Swingle, the coordinator of the writing committee of the governing body and the coordinator of the writing department, was away on his own trip. I found it puzzling that such an intensive investigation should be initiated in his absence. Yet the governing body members doing the investigating had given no indication that anything out of the ordinary had arisen. They should call for such a full-scale inquiry, or rather that should call for such a full-scale inquiry. From experience within the organization, I felt that this absence of any explanation for their action was indicative, not of something innocuous or benign, but of something that, when it came into the open, could prove quite devastating to those affected by it. For that reason, on Monday, April 21st, 1980, I phoned the Brooklyn headquarters from Alabama and asked to speak to governing body member Dan Sidlick. He was not available, the Society's telephone operator informed me. I then asked to speak to governing body member Albert Schroeder, who was acting as chairman of the body that year. He likewise was not available. I left a message with the operator that I would appreciate if one or the other would phone me. The next day, a call came from Albert Schroeder. Before considering that conversation and the way he, the chairman of the governing body, answered my questions, consider what I eventually learned had already happened and what was in the process of happening at the time he talked to me. Well, what was already happening was a purge had started at Bethel without the knowledge of Ray Franz and several others who were later to become key members or victims of the Inquisition. That's for the next segment.